The mistake was he withdrew from them, and he left himself isolated from encouragement. Let me share with you something about that very briefly. That is one of the tactics that the enemy uses on believers. I've said this before, I'll say it quickly. The first thing that you read in Scripture that God says is not good is that the man should be alone. God created us to have companions, to have fellowship, to have relationship. Those who have been in prison know that solitary confinement is one of the worst things that they can go through. Because you are created by God to have relationship. So being alone, being isolated is great punishment. And yet sometimes when people are hurt or disappointed, they withdraw. And when they withdraw from fellowship, that's when they become most vulnerable. If you ever take the moment to, and some have, some don't care to, but if you ever take the moment to see any of these television shows of animals and kinds of things that animals do, you'll see that oftentimes a lion or a wolf or a hyena or whatever, when it's going after prey, what they'll do is they look for the weakest and they try to isolate it. We all know that. And once it's isolated, then it's their victim. They eat it, and that's how it ends, right? Do you think that the enemy, who is a roaring lion, doesn't try to isolate you? Do you think that the enemy doesn't use a tactic like that on you? Do you think that? He does. He's a roaring lion. He's seeking whom he may devour. What is he going to do? We're sheep. What does he want to do? He wants to separate us. He wants us to move off into a direction on our own, to be by ourselves. Why is that? Because you're easier to get to. Because you're easier to get to when you're alone. You're alone with your thoughts, with your doubts, with your disappointments, with your grief, with your pain, with your sorrow. With all of those things, you're alone. And then somebody tries to speak to you, and somebody says, I'm thinking of you. And you don't want to hear it. And then after a little while, you'll say, well, nobody loves me. Everybody forsook me. Nobody cares about me. The enemy helps to drive you in that direction. Why? Because when you're with others, you can be on fire. Take a piece of coal that you're using for a barbecue. Remove that coal. Put it by itself. Even though it was in the center and red hot, when you move it to itself, be by itself, it doesn't take that long for it to go out. And what do? We voluntarily abandon fellowship when we're hurting. I understand that. I've done that. I've done it more than once. I'm speaking from experience. I'm telling you that when I have abandoned fellowship, when I've been hurt deeply and I've abandoned fellowship, is when I've been most vulnerable to doubts and hurt. It's when somebody who's a friend of mine who has spoken to me and prayed for me and encouraged me and let me know, it's that kind of person that has helped me to get my feet back up underneath me and to walk with the Lord. And yes, when I was younger in the Lord, that happened more than once. Now I'm kind of aware of those things, and I try to be aware of those. There are things that happen in your own church that you could be part of that you don't do. Why? Because you've got other things to do, and you miss out on blessings. You ought to be aware of those things. You ought to be aware of that. It is in fellowship that you're strong.